Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be with you today. My name's Tony. I'm the founder and lead strategist for the Unstuck group, and really looking forward to today's conversation with you. This is for churches that are trying to reach 2,000 and beyond in attendance. And I've shared with others in the past, I've thought, I want to just have a gathering of people, and I'm going to invite my favorite people to hang out with, and we're just going to enjoy a few days together. And if I ever host that gathering, the three people on the panel today would definitely be invited. I want to introduce for you Amy Anderson. Amy is joins me on the Unstuck group team. She's our director of consulting and has served many years prior to her time with the Unstuck group at a great church in Minneapolis. And Amy, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you, Tony.
And then secondly, I'm going to introduce to you Chad Moore. Chad is the lead pastor of Sun Valley Community Church in the Phoenix area. And Chad, remind me, how many locations at Sun Valley today?
Yeah. Hey, everybody. So we have 5 locations in the East Valley of Phoenix.
Yeah, and many thousands of people that are a part of their church, and you're going to enjoy hearing from Chad today. And then finally, I want to introduce Matthew Cork. Matthew is the lead pastor of Friends Church in Yorba Linda, California. And Matthew, welcome.
Hi, Tony. Thank you.
And also a multi-site church. Is that right, Matthew?
That's right. Yes, we have 3 locations right now and planning another one this next year. So
very good, very good. Well, you'll hear more from Amy and Chad and Matthew in the coming moments. But before we get to the conversation, let me just frame up a couple of things for us today. First of all, live Q&A is available throughout our discussion, and there's a link at the bottom of the screen for you to do that. And my friend Mark, who is also on our team at the Unstuck group, will be responding to questions. But the other thing he'll be doing is collecting questions for us to try to address at the end of our conversation. We'll try to hit as many of those questions as possible. So feel free to participate in the chat at the bottom of the screen. And then additionally, if you want to join us in sharing the discussion on social media, you can use hashtag UnstuckChurch for that part of the conversation. So where we're going today, just to give you a preview of the discussion on reaching 2,000 and beyond, we're going to hit what we've identified are 4 kind of core barriers to growth for churches this size. The first is trying to recognize and then deal with the toxic culture that can develop in a church. We'll hit that one first because I want to get that one out of the way. Secondly, we'll talk about overcoming a leadership void in staff and volunteer teams. The third topic we're going to hit is multi-site model, missteps, and how they can set us back. And then finally, we're going to talk about complexity creep and why it's undermining the vision in churches, particularly large churches. So without spending any more time on the introduction, I just want to dive into the conversation. Like I mentioned, the first topic we're going to talk about is operating with the toxic culture, and we're going to try to avoid that. We're not going to encourage that, Amy, but you get to work with a lot of churches and a lot of larger churches. And in the churches that you work with, what are some of the typical signs of a toxic culture? And Amy, how are you finding that stunting the growth of these churches?
Sure. I think Patrick Lencioni said it best when he talked through the 5 dysfunctions of a church, but those are really the signs that we see when we work with churches that are stuck because of this issue. So first, there's a lack of trust. So no one's asking one another for help. The team is very guarded. They're disingenuous with one another. You observe like there's no healthy conflict or conversation going on. And then there's a lot of meetings after the meetings that tend to happen. And the other symptom I'd say is just that the team lacks performance. And that goes to your next question. So, how does it stunt growth? But part of the reason is that you end up when the culture is a little more toxic or unhealthy, you end up with a lot of individual contributors on your team. And so you're not really being able to leverage the collective talents and the collective wisdom of the team, where they're engaging in conflict in a healthy way and agreeing and disagreeing. And it stunts growth because they're not operating out of 1 Corinthians 12, where we have to recognize we've all been given different gifts, and those gifts have been designed so that we can complete the team, not compete with one another. So those are a couple of ideas.
Yeah. Matthew, you and I have actually had a recent conversation about I think, unique, incredible culture that has developed at Friends Church through the years. Amy and I have both had a chance to engage with your team. And for the pastors out there that sense a toxicness, is that a word? Toxicity, maybe that's better,
Yeah.
in their culture. I mean, can you share some of the key steps you've made along the way to develop the healthy culture that exists at Friends Church?
Well, yeah, one of the interesting things is, like you, Tony, somebody stepped into one of our meetings, and after the meeting, they just kind of looked at me, and I said, "What are you thinking?" They said, "People disagreed with you, and it was okay."
Yeah.
And I went, "Well, they better. Then that's only going to make us better." And I think one of the things that we've tried to do, since I've been the lead pastor here now for 13 years, but I've been on staff 26, I took over a toxic culture. So I was kind of in the midst of great change. And when I came in, the church had kind of blown up and gone through some stuff. So I know toxic. And yet I looked at it, and from where I'm at now, I look back, and I think one of the things I've done is I invited them into my life. And when I invited them into my life to do life with them, to be friends with them, to associate with them, the agreement and disagreement it's part of the culture that we've created that allows them to have a freedom. It's not, we have a value called we, not me. And the we part, it's huge. And if I don't live that out, they're never going to live it out. And if that room, whether it's elders or your leadership team, if that we, not me is not there, and if there is not disagreement in the room, you're going to have disagreement outside that room. You're just not going to know about it. And then that's going to create the little silos. And just like Amy said, when those conversations begin to happen outside the room, and I used to watch them before I became the lead pastor, and I was like, oh my gosh, meetings are happening after the meeting. And now when I walk out, meetings are happening after the meeting, but there's laughter and there's fun. And I'm not saying they don't talk without me. They probably do. But I think it's a healthy talk because we have disagreed. So as I've invited them into my life, they understand it's we, not me. The vulnerable place I kind of put myself in as a leader has allowed for us to create, I think, a great foundation to now be able to build a culture of trust. And it all starts there.
Yeah, Matthew, what would you say for the folks that have been trained? You can't allow people to get close to you. You can't share your life with people because eventually you're going to have to lead them. How would you respond to that?
Well, I think leadership actually comes with respect. And with that respect, for me, the way they're going to respect me is they're going to see me be a normal human being. They're going to actually see my strengths and my faults and my weaknesses. And if they love you and they respect you, they're going to allow you to lead them. I mean, I look at our staff, and I had my roommate from college, reported to me for 15 years. And we have a great relationship. He's no longer on our staff, but it ended well. And we're still great friends. But it was because we respected each other. And I think it goes both ways. As a pastor, I have to respect them.
That's right.
And I have to show them dignity and treat them like I would want to be treated. So inviting them in, you're going to get hurt, but you're going to be hurt worse, I think, if you don't have people a part of your life. And then you're going to isolate, and then you're going to shrink up, and it's going to be about you and not about the church. And so just face it, hurt, schisms, those things, they happen. We're human beings. But I promise you, it's much better inviting them in than shunning them out.
That's good. Good word. Chad, as a lead pastor, help us. What are some first steps that we can be taking if we do start to sense there are toxic elements in the culture? How do you as a lead pastor respond when you sense something like that is starting to bubble up?
Yeah, I think what Matthew said was brilliant on the positive side. On the negative side, which is the context of your question, you get what.
By the way, do you like how I asked Matthew the easy question and gave you the harder question?
I noticed that coming up, Tony. Thank you for that. When you see negative things, I would say you get what you tolerate. And as the lead person is the cultural architect of the organization. And so if you have regular things that are coming up and bugging you, you've got to address that. Because if you don't, you're just tolerating it. And in some ways, you're causing it to happen. You're saying that it's okay. The other thing I would mention too, at my house, as a dad, as a husband, in a lot of ways, my wife and I are the cultural architects of the house. Mm-hmm. There are moments at the dinner table that my teenager or my 9-year-old may say something that is not appropriate for the culture of our house. They didn't respect mom. I don't wait until later to mention that to them. I call it out at the table because I'm communicating as a family. This is how we operate with each other. This is what we do. This is what we don't do. So I think bottom line, my answer to your question, Tony, is it's okay to be the leader. Mm-hmm. And be the cultural architect. And if there's things you don't like, you've got to address it. And you can address it respectfully, even in front of the family, because that communicates to the whole family at once. This is how we do it. This is how we don't do it. And I think that's a healthy thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that you highlight that role of culture architect, Chad. I used to, when I was challenging, encouraging senior pastors, particularly of larger churches, talk about 3 key roles. You're the primary teacher communicator at your church. You're the primary vision caster at your church. You're the primary leader of leaders, particularly that senior leadership team. I used to end the job description there, but have started to, and largely because of watching pastors like you and Matthew and others through the years acknowledge there really is a 4th key role, and that's this champion of the culture that we're trying to shape in our churches. So I'm glad to hear you talk on that. Amy, help us with some practical next steps. What are you seeing churches do to move forward and really start to shape a healthy culture?
Yeah, it's actually really fresh. I was just with a great church, great lead pastor, great team members. Individually, they were all remarkable. But as I worked with them, I experienced very low level of laughter, very low level of pushback in all of our conversations. And so I knew something was off. And so that's what we wrestled with a lot, was this culture topic. And a real simple thing, we always say at the Unstuck group, start with perspective. And so the 5 dysfunctions was actually a next step for them to do this assessment and actually take a look at how are we doing in these 5 different areas. And so they're all getting the book, and they're going to take the assessment and start to work through some of those exercises. But maybe even more practically, they were lacking relationships. They just didn't know one another. And so I encouraged the senior pastor just to begin. They all gather at their weekly meetings, start with a relational component, help the team get to know one another better. And there's samples, of that in the 5 dysfunctions, but even just giving each person a couple of minutes to give an update or what's keeping you up at night, let people share a little bit of who they are, disclose, because that always builds relationship. And without that fabric, then they're all just going to be level 1 leaders. Because, as Maxwell says, you're not going to climb to level 2 until people actually like you and you can get along with other people. So as a senior pastor, you can start to go, how do we help our team get to know one another better? And then lastly, because they were engaged with us, we did the Leading from Your Strengths assessment, and it's based off of the DISC, but it helps one another understand how we're just innately wired differently. We all probably know it in our marriage relationships. Spouses are often different in some key areas, and it can be a source of laughter instead of a source of frustration when you just understand how your pace is different from someone else's or what you focus on. So just getting to know one another are I think, some key first steps. But the other thing is, if you know that there's a catalyst in the toxicity, if you know there's a person or a situation, you just do have to move in. You got to move in wisely, but you can't wait. I love the urgency, Chad, that you just talked about, and you get what you tolerate. Only you, the leader, can move in on some of those situations because you're the only one who has decision rights on what to do with it. And so you can't look the other way. You can't hope it'll go away. You've got to have those tough conversations.
Excellent. We could do a whole webinar just on that topic, but we're going to move on. So the second key topic that we wanted to hit today was operating with a leadership void. And the key question that we're going to try to ask as our answer here is, how do you overcome a leadership void in your staff and your volunteer teams? And Amy, I'm going to go right back to you here. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, good.
What do you got?
What are some evidences that a large church is operating with a leadership void? And how does
Some
that cap
evidence.
growth?
I would say one key evidence is that only the top leaders are making decisions, meaning every decision has to be brought all the way up to the top for discussion, for input. And it's amazing in large churches how much of that still exists out there. And what's happened is that they just haven't clarified some things or made the lanes really clear or set the vision for what they're trying to do. So, I mean, even high level leaders, I got to check in with Chad or Matthew, before we do that. And so when decision making is really controlled at the top, that's a sign that there's a leadership void because decision muscles haven't been developed. The other thing I'd say is that most of the staff are still doers. So if you look around at your team and they are not modeling Ephesians 4 where they're equipping the body to do the ministry, instead they're just doing a lot of things, that tends to be a huge evidence that there's a leadership void. And by the way, I find this, I know we're talking about breaking 2,000, but the churches that hit about 1,000, that's where they really hit this crisis point. And that's the time to change it because they've been growing and they keep adding part-time people to fill gaps on things that need to get done. And what they've done is they've hired dozens of people who do stuff. And what you need to do to get through this barrier, whether it's 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, you need to be able to hire people who are leaders and equippers and giving ministry away and building those systems. Because that's the only way that you're going to break through that leadership void. And often you've got to add some new people to the team to get that flywheel going as well, to even model what does that look like to be an equipper versus a doer.
That's good. Chad, again, both Amy and I have had a chance to engage with your team at Sun Valley. And one of the things that has really struck me about who Sun Valley is that strong leadership culture that you have. What can you help us? What are practically some of the things that you've done through the years to develop that strong culture?
Yeah, something real specific, and it just occurred to me, and it just kind of in our seasons of growth, right around the time we were breaking through 2000, which is the context of this conversation, is our leaders moved from being generalists to being specialists. And we started looking around going, we don't need people who can do lots of different things. We need people who can do this thing really, really well. And so we started to lean into that. I stopped carrying the ball on a lot of things and let the people who could carry it so much better than I can, carry it. And then we moved from, or I had to move from leading followers, to Amy's point a moment ago, leading followers to leading leaders, which is a little bit different. It's not Captain Kirk telling everybody what to do. It's Jean-Luc Picard saying, getting that counsel and then saying, let's make it so. I mean, that's the shift. That was a total nerdy. But with that, as the cultural architect, we started thinking through what makes us different, what are our leadership distinctives, and we spent some time writing that down. Actually, now if you come in our office, it's on the wall, and hopefully it's also happening down the hall, as they say. And so those are things that we celebrate when we see it. If a leadership distinctives, one of them, for example, is we love first, we lead second, but we always do both. And so that's grace and truth. And so when we see that happening, I will celebrate that. And all staff, we give away little money cards for people that values are on display. They led in a way that we want to lead. So we celebrate that kind of stuff. We look for it. We call it out if we don't see it. Those kinds of things. But in that shift, as you grow, you've got to move from generalist to specialist. And so you want to have the right kind of people and you want to put them in the right roles. Yeah.
That's good. That's good. Matthew, it probably doesn't surprise you that in larger churches, almost every church we work with is talking about leadership pipeline. And I know this is something that you're intentional about at Friends Church as well. And would you just mind sharing, you can go at it either way. What are the things that have worked to develop your leadership pipeline, or what are the things that you've learned that have been failures for you when it comes to developing that pipeline?
Well, first, complexity was not our friend when it came to the leadership pipeline. And we've just come down to it's simple is much better for us. And we kind of did it in three ways as we started developing leaders. And first was, as we partner with them, you watch me, we do it together. Now you go do it. And I get to watch them, and then I get to help correct and move or motivate or challenge or learn. because they do it different. And I think for me, I have a teaching team, and I'm the old guy on the teaching team now, which is kind of scary. I don't know how that happened so fast, but I'm the old dude. And I look back, and I had two guys that were 28 and 26 when they started. And the model was, and I don't think I was the best teacher of the three, but I was the one that was on stage, and I believe God had called me to that. And as I started to bring them alongside of me, it was, okay, you're watching me. Now you're going to join me. So every new teacher that teaches on our stage, we do a sermon together. So the way we introduce them for the first 3, 4, 5 times is they do part of the sermon with me. And so we get to interact together. And then their next step is then they'll do it. And I get to watch them, and then we get to watch them grow. And I think part of it is when you identify that leader, you deploy that leader. And as you deploy that leader, there's a lot of trust that goes with that. And the trust is they're going to fail. And part of that is going to be their great learning. But then I'm going to be there right beside them, because if I believe, and we've identified them as a leader that's going to be at our church, here's 1 or 2 things are going to happen. Either they're going to get more responsibility with me and in this church, or they're going to go leave and take their leadership gift elsewhere because they've hit a ceiling and they can't do it here. Mm-hmm. And so for us, we just notify, we have great leaders, but it started to rise because they understood, oh, there's opportunity for me here. Matthew doesn't do everything, doesn't want to do everything, and there's only a few things that I can do well. And just like Chad was saying, even though I didn't understand his nerdy illustration,
I don't think I got it right.
I know.
There's probably some nerd out there that's going, he doesn't know.
Yeah, he doesn't know what he's talking about. I don't know what you're talking about, but that's okay. I look at it and I say, once I identify him, and I brought them in. The exciting part was us doing it together and watching them grow, but giving them that opportunity to do something. And when they do it, we celebrate, just like Chad was saying. We have a great celebration. I mean, that's part of the greatest things about coming together. We have a value called contagious enthusiasm. And it's not that all of our accountants and all of our financial people are so fired up. You go in, you can't, they're just full of energy and life, but they are enthusiastic about the vision in the church. And you can see it in them. So we celebrate contagious enthusiasm. And we are enthusiastic about our leaders. And when they do something great, man, we celebrate that.
That's good. Chad, let me circle back to you. This is a constant theme that we find in working with larger churches. It's about finding high capacity senior leaders. And I just want to hear from you. And I have a sense of what your response is going to be, but I think this might help the pastors that are listening or watching today. Do you find it more challenging to find higher capacity leaders the larger your team gets? Why or why not?
Yes. I think the why is because in our little industry, right? If you want to call it that, meaning the larger a church gets and industry standards and all those kinds of things, once your church breaks, several thousand people, there's not a lot of churches in that category anymore. And so suddenly we're looking for people from other churches who haven't been where you are or where you're going. So I think you have to think outside the box. What we started doing is I started looking to churches around the country that had really good executive pastors, but they were especially good at one particular facet of their job. And then we invited them to come and would you just do that part of the job and be part of an executive team? We started thinking through those things. But hiring good people is a big deal. It's a difficult thing. It's something that we're always mining, always looking for. Yeah. So is it harder? Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think you have to become more of a scout. You're always looking for talent. I think as the churches grows, the game changes. Maybe we heard some of that language before, but you go from like running track when you planted the church to like now you're, playing pro football. And so you start scouting talent all the time. Yeah, but it gets more difficult and it's a big deal. And for us, if we want to change the culture, we hire from without. If we like it the way it is, we try to hire from within. But sometimes it's not quite that pure.
Yeah. One quick follow-up. Is there, we all swing and miss on hiring, so that's going to happen. But is there one key characteristic that you've learned you have to find in the folks that you're bringing into these higher level leadership roles, Chad?
Yeah, there's probably several things, but you asked for one.
Yeah.
For humility. Humility and timidity are not the same thing.
Hmm.
Humility is a sober-mindedness to know who you are, know who you're not, and do what's best for the team. It's also the chief virtue of the Christian life, right? God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. So if somebody is teachable and talented, and there's a humility about them, and they know that through the team we can impact so much more, so many more lives than if they were on their own, that's what I look for.
That's
And
good.
humble people laugh a lot and they're fun to work with. Humor and humility come from the same root. So I look for that.
That's good. That's good. I like that. All right. Again, we could spend a whole webinar on that, but we're going to keep going. The third key area that we wanted to focus on is multi-site model missteps. 3 M's there. The key question we're going to look at here are, what are the most common multi-site missteps and how do they slow you down? And Amy, again, you have a lot of experience through the years in multi-site church from your days at Eagle Brook, and you're married to a campus pastor, so that keeps you in the game, I'm guessing. We often say at the Unstuck group, though, that multi-site is not a growth strategy. It's an evangelism strategy. And can you expound on that?
Yeah, I think one of our principles with multi-site is that you replicate who you are. So if you are not a thriving, growing church right now, multi-site will not turn you into a high momentum, thriving, healthy church because you launch who you are. That's what comes out of it. You should go multi-site because you have to. And I would say you have to because you're out of room, you're out of space, or you've just got this crystal clear calling that God's calling you to do it. So why it's an evangelism strategy is that you're putting campuses where your people already are, but it's closer to them so that they can invite their family and friends to church. Because we find that while we love our church and we'll drive 25 minutes, those that we're inviting, that feels like a pretty long trip just to go to church. So once you've got that health and you've got the momentum and you've got a good cluster of people in an area, it becomes an evangelistic strategy to reach more people because you've got a critical mass there.
That's good. Chad, I'll tell you, we get to work with all kinds of multi-site churches, and Sun Valley has figured something out through the years. You would probably admit you've made some mistakes along the way that's helped you get where you are, but you're doing a lot right when it comes to multi-site. So can you give us some of those insights that you've picked up through the years as you've moved from a single location church to 6 locations?
Yeah, and I appreciate the encouragement. We've paid a lot of dumb tax. And we still are, I think in some ways. Totally agree with what Amy said. The best reason to do multi-sites is because you have to. And so a lot of it is figuring out who you are and then really making sure you're replicating who you are. A couple of quick things. If you put a campus pastor at another campus, have them with you at least a year before you make them a campus pastor in your church. Because you want to replicate who you are. They don't know who you are if they're new. And so you want to be kind of up close over time with your campus pastors. In our environment, I really want them to be an extension of me, not my gifting or wiring necessarily, but heart, values, those kinds of things. And so I'm responsible for the air war side of the ministry, kind of the come and see, follow me of what Jesus did. And they're responsible for the ground war, the be with me, remain in me. They get people in the life of the church. So to be really blunt with it, our job's to kind of get them there. That's the weekend team. And it's the campus pastor's job to keep them there and get them in the life of the church. But you really want that campus pastor to reflect who you are and what you're trying to replicate. So make sure they're with you for a time before you give them the ball.
That's good. Amy, again, lots of opportunities here, and it really is amazing. I mean, almost every larger church that we're working with now has already moved to multi-site, or they're talking about it. But through that, you and I have learned some missteps along the way that churches make when it comes to their multi-site strategy. Would you mind sharing some of the common things that we're finding?
Sure. One of the common ones is what I just kind of alluded to. They launch too small. So you've got a large mono site, they've got a lot of energy. It's got a feel and a vibe, and they launch, way too small. And the church doesn't get that same feel. They aren't, when we talk about replicating who we are, if it's too small, it doesn't have the feel of that sending church. And if it's too small, then it can start to take on a small church mindset pretty quick. And then you don't have a big enough core to serve. You don't have a big enough core to give. And so it limits growth because it never really gets on its feet. It's just too small.
Yeah, let me just jump into, because Amy and I have both seen this in churches we've served, and you don't hear these stories a lot of times, but we've had to process with several churches closing down multi-site campuses because they launched too small. So I can't overemphasize what Amy's talking about here. You need to start larger. In fact, I think Leadership Network just shared some recent information through some research that they've done, and they actually surveyed hundreds of multi-site churches, and the consistent theme they heard from those churches is, we wish we would have launched larger.
Yep.
So sorry to interrupt, Amy, go ahead.
No, it's good. I think the second thing is common misstep is they don't clarify decision making early in the process. And so there's so much confusion all of a sudden about, do I get to make that decision as a campus? Does the central team make that decision? And so again, all decisions start going all the way up the food chain. People aren't empowered to lead and get done. So it wastes a lot of time, and it creates a lot of toxicity again in the culture, because I thought I could make that call. They hire too many people. So they launch a campus and they think they can staff it at a certain level, and all of a sudden they're just bleeding financially, because not only did they launch with too many staff, but they probably launched it with staff who are wired to do stuff again versus lead and equip. Another common one, and this one might be a little dicey, but this is what I see. They launch with live teachers. So they put a second campus or a third campus out, and it's easy at first to just find another teacher and let them teach. But if you play that movie forward, it has impact that it's not always thought through when they make that decision. Meaning, as you can kind of tell with Chad and Matthew, they're the lead pastor at their church. They teach, they set a culture at their church. And when you have different people teaching at different locations, as much as you try to move all together, eventually those churches really take on the personality of that leader that's teaching. And by the way, that's not a bad thing. The kingdom still wins with these churches. However, I've seen it too many times where that wasn't there, and they wanted to be one church, multiple locations, and they were, hanging on the efficiencies they're going to gain, through all the central services. They thought they were going to be a multi-site church, but really what they ended up being were separate churches in the end, because that's sort of where those churches go when you go with a live teacher in each location. So I'm not saying you can't do it, but it's not a true multi-site when you look at all the other factors and success things that are attached to multi-site. That's good. Can I just add one more?
Sure, please do.
So I think the other common misstep is that they launch, they decide this is what we're going to launch to this campus, and then the sending campus still keeps all of their other programming in place. And I'll say that because there's a large church I worked with, and it's almost like this big kingdom, because they'd been in existence, one location for years, and they had so many things that they offered to their congregation. They launched a multi-site, but honestly, that multi-site felt nothing like the original sending campus, because they pared it down without paring down the main campus at the same time. I hate to say main, but sending campus. Mm-hmm. And so it ended up with, it was just a misstep, and it took a long time for that multi-site to get some traction. So how all that limits growth, those decisions, a lot of them are tied to finances. Like financially, you get strapped, mm-hmm. and you can't afford your multi-site strategy. Culture gets toxic, especially, like I said, when it goes back to decision rights. And then with all that complexity, staff will revert going back to doing things instead of leading things. So
that's good.
I could go on, but
yeah, I know. Yeah, lots of great learning there. Matthew, you mentioned you have 3 locations and are moving forward with a 4th. How long ago was your second location launched?
It was about 2 years ago, 2.5 years.
Yeah. So
we have a different model. So
okay. Yeah.
in that, and not to disagree with Amy, and even look at it, we have a value that is called deliberate apprenticeship.
Yeah.
And part of my job now is to apprentice and develop the next generation. The other thing is, we're very clear on why we're planting campuses. We're planting campuses not to have another venue somewhere. We're planting campuses for an evangelism strategy to win people to Jesus Christ, and ultimately expand the kingdom. We believe that our campuses will be around 3 to 5 years, and then they actually will become a separate church.
Yeah.
We have 10 campuses that are going to be launched in the next 10 years is our plan. And so when we go in, we do live teaching, but I teach at the other campus. We do video probably 15 to 20% of the time, and that's on shared vision things and other things, but I have live teachers. But what has been happening here for 13 years is we've had a teaching team for 13 years. So what happens here, I'm in the pulpit twice a month at the main campus, central campus. So the sending campus only sees me twice a month. So when I go over and I'm only twice a month at the other campus, they're used to that already. And then I have now 4 teachers. And so between the 3 campuses, we rotate. I just spoke at our Orange campus 2 weeks ago. I was there last week participating in their capital campaign and watching and looking at the excitement of their building being done. It can work. It's complicated. And she is absolutely right. Our church is 105 years old. And what you guys came in and helped us do is we had already pared down when I took over lots and lots of ministries. But we made sure that in our campuses, we had a pathway. But the pathway had to happen at the sending campus. And things had to go away. And so we have eliminated so many things to start this model and to take the kingdom outside of our 4 walls. But the pathway was key. And as we worked on that pathway, we're very clear on who we are and who we're not now at our sending campus. And it has paid off in great dividends for the campuses we have already. And now we believe we're prepared. And that's why we took a little bit of time and waited for the next campus, because we needed to make sure with our years and all that we've done was make sure we were doing this right. And honestly, we had to get rid of some things, and you guys came in and helped us even kind of shape ourselves better to create the next campuses that are coming online.
And that's a great segue then to our final topic today, which is complexity creep. And the key question that we want to try to answer today is, how does complexity undermine the vision of your church? Amy, again, I'm going to put you on the spot. This is a kind of a delicate topic, but first of all, can you share some real church examples of how complexity can get a large church stuck?
Yeah, well, without sharing names, right?
That's right. Protect the innocent here.
Friends Church.
We'll call it Bren's Church. So. Well, again, it probably sounds like I'm repeating myself a little bit, but churches that are trying to break the 2,000 barrier, you're already a large church, right? And there's probably lots of stuff going on. And so you've been adding things over the years as your church got larger. And this church I was just working with, they hadn't stopped anything. And so it was no ministry ever had a funeral for itself, because we just kept adding. And by the way, there's people who love those things. I mean, if you ask, there's always someone who likes something that you're doing. But this is the reason that they're stuck, because it's kind of like if you go to the Cheesecake Factory and you want to have a meal and you look at that menu and there's just so many choices. You're like, I don't know what to eat. You want to have clarity on that, right? So their discipleship path, or what next step should be. There are so many things going on in the church. They're stuck because they're afraid to prune, and they're afraid to get rid of things, because then people will be upset, and then maybe people will leave, and that's not going to help if they want to. Those are typically, they feel a little tied because of the givers. They're the longtime attenders. And so that complexity, even in what you offer on the weekend, can cause you to stay stuck. So again, worked with a church that has 2 different types of services. One is kind of a blended one, we can call blended. And then the other one is kind of a more modern, kind of relevant experience. And the building looks half traditional and half blended. The people who attend those services look half traditional. I mean, blended and half. I mean, it's like 2 churches under one roof. And I get it when churches say, well, it's choices then. People have choices on, what they want to do with church. But I just think it adds a lot of confusion, because what church is it? What church are you inviting to? What church will, an outsider experience when they come in? How do we even brand our church if we want to really get our people fired up to be inviting people to church? And I say that because, if I invite someone to church, they probably aren't coming that weekend. But I want to keep that invitation going, and they'll show up any weekend and hopefully have a great experience. But when you've got all the different service styles, then you've got to kind of be really specific on what time they go and where they go. And what feels like choice really isn't choice, because then typically you've only got that one service time that you like, that you're able to go to church at that time. So all that to say, the complexity of things, you cannot be nimble. You can't clearly identify kind of who you are and next steps that people need to take. And undoing that just takes a lot of hard work.
Yeah. Yeah. And Chad, that's kind of where I wanted to go with you, because this is what I've noticed. And even going back to my days in ministry, and certainly now even with the Unstuck group, I've noticed that the natural gravitational pull is not toward simplicity. It's toward complexity. And I have to imagine, even as your church grows into the thousands, that gravitational pull probably gets stronger, doesn't it? So how do you address that?
Yeah, well, you have more and more people, so people have more and more ideas on what you should be doing, what you ought to be doing, and a lot of those ideas are good. They're just not great. I think in our conversation earlier, I mentioned I try to make myself continually think like a church planter, which means, why did we start this church? How did we get to where we are? And even though we're larger, we want to still think like a church plant, because church plants reach people. More people are going to give their life to Jesus in a church plant, all those kinds of things. And that's a mindset. There's an intentionality to that. I mean, if you don't get people in the church plant doesn't survive, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we just try to constantly think about, why are we here? What are we trying to do? And try to have that church plant mentality, which is kind of lean and mean. We're trying to reach people for Jesus, get them into the family, and just see that happen more and more. So I just try to think that way. And whoever the leader is, it's their job to keep everybody on track with that, because that vision, that cause, why you got into it, leaks. And so you constantly have to be disciplined to stay focused in the right direction.
That's
Hey,
good.
Tony, can I just jump in maybe before you ask the next question?
You bet.
Complexity is a sign that a church has slipped into the maintenance phase of a church life cycle, right? How do you lead people through the pruning process? What do you have them think about and consider?
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback first of all on something that Chad just shared. You really do have to go back to answer the question why. Why do we do church? And that's where the conversation has to begin. And in fact, I share with folks all the time, why we do church has to be more important than the way we do church. And until we get to back to that place where why we do church is more important than the way we do church, it's going to be difficult to wrestle the complexity creep down. After we come to that agreement, then the church does have to, as a beginning to creating a framework, identify what is our mission, where are we going in the future, and how are we going to get there. And part of the reason why churches have complexity is they've never defined that. They've never defined specifically, this is where we believe God's calling us, and this is specifically how we intend to get there. And I think a large part of that how question is, Amy, you and I have actually talked about this in the past. We call them growth engines for churches, and particularly for churches trying to reach 2,000, you have to identify your core growth engines. And when we talk about growth engines, we're talking both about numerical growth. We want the churches to be impacting more people's lives, but we also are talking about spiritual growth. We want more people taking their next steps toward Christ. And what I've learned is churches have to get focus on 3 or 4, but no more, core growth engines of the church, and really begin to resource with leadership and volunteer engagement and financial resources, communications focus. Have to get momentum around those growth engines if they're going to move out of the complexity that they're experiencing. And then Amy, finally, I will say it is a biblical principle. Pruning is a biblical principle. And the odd thing is businesses use pruning all the time to get focus in their business and to get momentum around whatever their core products and services are. Churches should own the pruning principle, but rarely implement it. We have to get back to leveraging that biblical principle. And from scripture, it's not just cutting back the dead. We actually periodically have to cut back healthy branches for the plant, in our case, for the church to be thriving and healthy. And so we have to go back to doing what the Bible said we should be doing if we're going to battle the complexity creep and then eventually return to sustained health. I tend to get on a soapbox when I start talking about that, but I do want to get to Q&A here. Before we jump to Q&A, a few reminders. First of all, we have, starting later this spring, a couple of coaching, well, actually several coaching networks through the Unstuck group. Two of them around Unstuck Church and also MultiSite are going to be hosted both in Atlanta and in Dallas, Texas. And so if you want to engage with Amy and myself and a couple other folks from the Unstuck group team, highly encourage you to get to the website, theunstuckgroup.com, and sign up, participate. We've had hundreds of leaders go through those coaching networks in the past, and hugely valuable to the churches that have experienced those. And then today we touched on MultiSite, and that is part of what we do at the Unstuck group. We have, I think, close to now 50 years of experience in MultiSite on the Unstuck group team. And we're helping churches of all different sizes, but particularly churches like yours trying to reach 2,000 and beyond, begin to shape a multi-site strategy so that hopefully, Chad referred to it as the dumb tax. You don't have to pay the dumb tax. You can actually learn from the mistakes that we've made in the past and help you launch multi-site with strength. So let's jump to the questions here. Mark has been feverishly relaying these questions to me. We're going to start with culture first. Matthew, this one is for you. How do you get, so you are the lead pastor, but the person that's asking this question is not, obviously. So the question is this: how do you get your lead pastor to open his or her life, especially if they're not a people person?
I'm going to pass that one to Chad. Just kidding. Well, here's what I would say. There are people in my life, and they use it a lot. I know you're too busy, or I know you don't have time, or I know this. And I would just say, I think that really isn't true. I am busy. But if one of my staff members would look to me and say, hey, can I take you to lunch? And I would say, for a leader, if you want to speak into your leader's life, take them to lunch and know what you want to say. Have 3 questions that you want to know. One could be personal. One could be leadership. Light them up in what lights them up. Their family probably lights them up. You just might not know it because they might not be a people person. Their job hopefully lights them up. What is it? And has 3 questions. And then after you get those questions answered, you've started a conversation, and then say, hey, do you mind maybe next month, or if that's too much, maybe the month after that, could I take you out again? Because I love learning. Mm-hmm. And a couple of my people have done that because they're input people, so they love input. They know I like going to lunch, so they'll take me to lunch, my favorite restaurant. But I always tell them, hey, be prepared, because I have an hour and I'd love to give it to you. But I'm just not going to hang out. I got something else going on. So I think invite them into your life, but be prepared and ask questions. Have your questions ready for them.
That's good. That's good. Chad, this one's for you. You mentioned shifting roles from generalist to specialist. Can you give some examples of those specialist roles that you added through the years?
Yeah, so probably the easiest example. So our executive team now is 5 people, including myself. The other 4 on the executive team were all executive pastors at large churches. Mm-hmm. But when they came on our team, we put them in their specialized niche. In other words, one was really good at HR, accounting, construction projects. Mm-hmm. So he's in charge of the business. One did all that, but was really great at managing weekend services and production. So that's what he's in charge of. So it's just thinking through as the bandwidth increases, who's the best at what. Well, let's just put them in charge of what they're best at. And then to a point that was mentioned earlier, just talking about complexity and that creep, the regular practice that I go through, I feel like now it's like every 6 months is, what am I going to stop doing? Because there are other people who do it better than me, and I'm just in the way, and I don't want to be the cork in the bottle. So I think you just think through who's best at what, and you let people be in the niches that they're in. Sometimes that gets difficult because you got to hire over people or move somebody around. And just because somebody's passionate about something doesn't mean that they're good at it, you know? They may just be passionately crappy at it. So you have to navigate people through that. But yeah, you know, as the game changes, you don't want a lineman, you know, being the wide receiver. You want a certain kind of person to do this, certain kind of person to do that. So you just think through it differently as it gets bigger, the game changes. So yeah.
That's good. Amy, this one's for you because you mentioned distinguishing as the church gets larger, doers from equippers or doers from developers. We can use different language. As you're trying to discern whether or not this is the right person for a leadership role, are there questions that you should be asking on the front end of that selection process? Are there things that you should be looking for? How can we make sure we're actually hiring developers or equippers rather than doers for leadership positions?
Wow, that's a great question. I wish there was a silver bullet for it, but you got to ask behavioral based questions. If it's someone outside your organization, you want to make sure that they're a proven builder. And so ask questions that allow you to listen for how they approach problem solving, how they engage other people in different solutions. If you're talking about your existing leadership team and you're kind of wondering, are they doers or are they equippers? One, look at their history. What have they done? And if you're still unsure if they've got the goods, you've just got to start focusing their energy in different ways. You've got to start holding them accountable to be meeting with leaders and giving things away and building systems and spending less time doing. One of the things that we say around here is great leaders coach for success and accept necessary endings. And so just start to lay out what you're measuring them against differently. One of the real basic ones I do with churches that are making this change is they have to actually, every 6 weeks, they kind of report what the 6 most important things are going to be. And one of those 6 is always a name of a couple people that of high potential volunteers who could take on a higher leadership role, meeting with them. So those are the behaviors of equippers. They're getting to know the people in your church. They're getting to know the staff that they lead. They've got an appropriate span of care, but they're delegating not just tasks, but responsibility. And they've got their hand on it to some degree. But if you even look at within the Unstuck Church, the different levels of leaders, you know, the 10s, the 50s, the 100s, the 1000s, you've got to make sure you've got people on your staff who either are or have the potential to leave at that 100s or 1000s level, not the 10s, not the 50s eventually.
That's good.
I know, Tony, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, no, I could go all day on all of that, but there are a couple other key multi-site questions, and I have one each for Matthew and for Chad. And Matthew, we're going to start with you. And by the way, I love the fact both of these churches are multi-site, but they, going into multi-site, had 2 different end games in mind. And so Matthew, specifically about your strategy, why launch campus that will eventually become a church? Why not just plant a new church?
Because most plants fail.
Yeah.
And there's 2 reasons they fail: money and leadership.
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of shepherds out there that think they're church planners, and they're not. And they're shepherds, and they're great shepherds, and they love people, but they have no clue what it means to go and evangelize and to start a church. So they'll go start a church, and they wonder why in 2 years they still got 20 people. Because they're not church planners. They're not pioneers. There's some pioneer people that can plant churches, and that's identifying the right leadership for the right space. And we've only learned that because long ago, there's churches that plant churches because they don't want that person on their staff anymore. That's why they planted them. And then the church fails, and everybody's going, well, we knew it was going to fail before we planted it. And I go, I think it's a stupid model. So, sorry, I could... Would you use something crappy? That was good. You need to coin that one, Chad. As I look
my examples are crappy. Is that
yeah, no, yours were great, but you had this phrase. It was awesome. I can't remember the first word, but as I look at it, we said, here, we want these campuses to succeed. How are they going to succeed? Well, finances and leadership and connection to the sending campus for a period of time allows them to create a financial base and develop who they are. Then they get to develop leaders. They get to be under the care. I'm still a part of the team. There's one elder board. There's one finance team. You know what's happened with our campuses now? they don't want to become church plants. They love being a part of the system. They love the larger than themselves. They're a part of something bigger now. And God is starting to grow this new system. And I didn't say you had to be a plant. I said, you're going to be a campus, and if God leads, it will be a plant. They don't want to be. And the leader, Jay's going, I get to teach, I get to lead, I get to have a capital campaign, and I don't have to deal with the elder board. I don't have to deal with all the financial side to the degree Matthew does. I love this. And so that's why we did it. And we just have believed that it's a great way to start churches. And if they want to be a plant, they have a better foundation after 5 years to start than we did, which is by giving them $50,000 and a senior pastor to go plant and say, good luck.
That's good. Yeah. And actually, I know Chad's church is doing some great things around supporting church plants after they plant, which is, I think, unique. And Chad, you and I are going to have to do a whole conversation at some point as you get down the road, because I think there's something to what your church is doing there. But I'm going to ask you a different question. The specific question has to do with, when do we know when to launch? So this church, large church, 7,000 at their main location, 1,000 at a second site, 1,600 at a third site. But they're asking the question, when do we know when it's time to consider a next campus? How does your team consider that?
Yeah, we think, biggest thing we think through is momentum. I think Amy said this earlier, and don't miss the brilliance of it. The best reason to start a campus is because you have to.
Mm-hmm.
It's the idea that you've got so much momentum at a location or at a couple of locations that it's the spillover effect. And really the building just can't hold. You don't want to, do 18 services in one location, maybe you do 4 or 5 or whatever the lid is, but you just have to do another campus. The thing that Matthew and I definitely have in common, even though we have different models, is a commitment to effectiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to replicate who you are. So if you're just killing it at a certain campus or in a certain location, of course you want to replicate that. If you're struggling, you don't want to replicate the struggle. So I think it's just thinking through, and obviously with prayer and discernment. But Tony, I would think through momentum. Are we at a place to where this is going to work? And through our years, we're at a point to where we tend to think, if we're going to launch a campus, is it going to be 1,000 people out of the gate? Well, that's a momentum thought. And so there has to be a lot of momentum going into it. But you also have to predict the future a little bit. You got to start preparing for that campus a couple of years out. So you're just gauging momentum all the time.
Very good. All right. Amy, Matthew, Chad, thank you again for joining us. This was a lot of fun. We should do this again sometime. And for everybody else that's been listening in, I just want to promise you, we will email you after this with a link to all the resources that were mentioned in today's webinar and a link to the recording of today's webinar. So if your friends weren't able to be here, you can share it with them. And let me just encourage you again, the Unstuck Group, we are here to serve you. We want to help churches move forward, to have a bigger kingdom impact. We've had the privilege through the years to serve both Matthew's church and Chad's church. And it's just a great opportunity, I think, for us to come alongside you. These are 2 thriving churches, but examples of how we can come alongside churches like theirs to help map out those next steps that they need to be taking. We would love to do that with you as well. And so if you want to have that initial conversation, you can check out the options that are available at the unstuckgroup.com. Thanks again for joining us today, and we'll look forward to seeing you again in the future.